Reflections. Shared Reading, Chapter 10, Lesson 2, The Constitutional Convention. What to know? How was a new plan of government developed at the Constitutional Convention? Describe how the Constitution set up a new plan of government. List the contributions of those who helped write the Constitution. Explain the importance of the Great Compromise. Vocabulary to study in Quizlet: federal system, republic, compromise, bill. And important people and places: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Edmund Randolph, William Patterson, and Gouverneur Morris. Philadelphia. The Constitutional Convention. You are there. The year is 1787. The city of Philadelphia has hired you to spread dirt over Chestnut Street in front of Pennsylvania State House. People keep stopping to ask you why you are covering up the cobblestones. You explain that a meeting to fix the Articles of Confederation is going on in the State House. The delegates who have traveled here from the various states need quiet so they can work. The dirt will soften the clatter of horses' hooves, helping the delegates concentrate on their work. And here we see an artwork. Benjamin Franklin arrives at the Pennsylvania State House. Routes. Ways to get there. Routes, or routes, to the Constitutional Convention, 1787. Walking, horseback, horse-drawn carriage. Miles traveled per day. Walking, 36 miles a day. Wow. Horseback, 70 miles per day. Horse-drawn carriage, 110 miles a day. And these are the colonial roads. If you look at the map key, you can see in kilometers and miles, so how far each group had to travel. The map and table above show the routes, and travel times to the Constitutional Convention. About how many miles is it from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia? So if we use this, maybe 300, 400. Our first section is called the Delegates. The Delegates. The delegates to the Philadelphia Convention began to gather in May 1787. One of the first to arrive was George Washington from Virginia, who received a hero's welcome for his service in the Revolutionary War. The delegates would elect him president of the convention. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and 100 pounds, James Madison, another Virginia delegate, did not command much attention. He was very little. Madison was shy and quiet and preferred the company of books to people. Yet Madison's contributions would make him known as the father of the Constitution. Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania made the most colorful entrance. And let's look at that artwork again. He made the most colorful entrance. Unable to walk or to ride in a bumpy carriage, the 81-year-old Franklin arrived in a Chinese sedan car carried by prisoners from the Philadelphia jail. In all, 55 delegates from 12 states came to the convention at the Pennsylvania State House. Wealthy and educated, the delegates were mainly lawyers, planters, and merchants. All of the delegates were men, and all of them were white. There were no women or enslaved people present at the convention. At that time, not all people had equal rights. Why did the delegates elect George Washington president of the convention? The next section. The work begins. The work begins. From the beginning, the delegates agreed to keep secret the things they talked about. They believed that talking in private would enable them to speak freely and make good decisions. Windows in the State House were covered, and guards stood at the doors. The Constitutional Convention, as the meeting in Philadelphia came to be known, started on Friday, May 25th. At first, the delegates offered ideas on how to improve the Articles of Confederation. Quickly, however, they reached a surprising decision. An entirely new plan of government, a new constitution needed to be written. In order to write it, the delegates worked hard for the next 4 months. One of the issues discussed throughout the convention was the relationship between the states and the national government. Some delegates thought that there should be a strong national government. Others believed that the states should have more power than the national government. Only a few delegates agreed with George Reed of Delaware. He said that the states should be done away with altogether. Even most of those who wanted a strong national government thought that getting rid of the states would be going too far. Instead, the delegates agreed to strengthen the existing federal system. Federal system in which the power to govern was shared by the national government and the state governments. The states would keep some powers and share other powers with the federal or national government. The federal government would have all power over matters that affected the nation as a whole, such as commerce and defense. To keep power over their own affairs, the states would set up state and local governments, make state laws, and conduct state and local elections. Both the states and the federal governments would have their own court systems. Both would raise money by taxing citizens. However, the states would no longer print money, or have armies, or navies. In the case of an attack by another country or state, the federal government would have to defend the states. The delegates set up this federal system so that the new rules of government would be the supreme law of the land. They called their plan the Constitution of the United States of America. The Constitution helped found the American Republic because it said that voters could participate in both state and national elections. In a republic, the people choose representatives to run the government. In this way, the Constitution would guarantee a Republican form of government for both the states and the nation. How is power shared in a federal system? Geography, Philadelphia. The street map below shows Philadelphia in the late 1700s. Find the State House, where the Constitutional Convention was held. This area of Philadelphia was one of the busiest parts of the city. During the week, people shopped at an open-air public market, like a farmer's market or swap meet, and children attended the local Quaker school. On the weekends, many people attended services at one of the city's many churches. The next section is called Debate and Compromise. Debate and Compromise. During their work, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention often disagreed with one another. A major disagreement was about how each state would be represented in the new Congress. Edmund Randolph and the other Virginia delegates introduced a plan for Congress called the Virginia Plan. Under this plan, Congress would have two parts or houses. The number of representatives that a state would have in both houses would be based on that state's population. States with more people would have more representatives and more votes in Congress. This plan would favor the large states, such as Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, which had many people. "Not fair," replied the delegates from the small states. William Patterson of New Jersey accused the Virginia plan of, quote, striking at the existence of the lesser states. The plan would have given large states control of Congress. Patterson offered a different plan called the New Jersey Plan. Under this plan, the new Congress would have one house in which each state would be equally represented. This plan would give the small states the same number of representatives as the large states. And let's look at this illustration, which is on 2 pages. Page 430 and 431 in your books. Please find Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, Roger Sherman, George Reed, George Washington. Let's see, where's George Washington? Why do you think George Washington is seated on a stage? Remember, his role was the president of the convention. For weeks, the delegates argued about how states should be represented in Congress. Finally, the delegates realized that in order to reach an agreement, each side would have to give up some of what it wanted. In other words, the delegates would have to make a compromise. The delegates decided to set up a committee to work out a compromise. In one committee meeting, Roger Sherman of Connecticut presented a new plan called the Connecticut Compromise. So we had the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan, and now we have the Connecticut Compromise. It was based on the idea of a two-house Congress. In one house, representation would be based on the population of each state, as in the Virginia plan. In the other house, each state would be equally represented, as in the New Jersey plan. Either house could present a bill or an idea for a new law. Either house could present a bill or an idea for a new law. However, both houses had to approve a bill before it became a law. Committee members from the large states thought that the compromise gave too much power to the small states. To avoid this, the committee added another idea. Only the House in which representation was based on population would be able to propose tax bills. The committee presented the Great Compromise, as it became known, to the whole convention. Although the delegates continued to argue, many wanted to make sure they would have a new plan of government. On July 16, 1787, they approved the Great Compromise. And why was the Great Compromise important to the Constitutional Convention? And in this artwork, we see an African American woman at work. Before slavery was ended, African Americans were not allowed to vote, hold office, or own property. Compromises on slavery. Under Roger Sherman's plan, population would affect each state's representation in Congress. This raised an important issue that troubled many people in the young nation: slavery. Delegates from the northern and the southern states argued about whether enslaved African Americans should be counted when figuring each state's population. The southern states had many more slaves than the northern states. Delegates from the southern states wanted to count slaves when figuring out how many representatives a state would have in Congress. That way, the southern states could count more people and have more representatives. Delegates from the northern states did not want slaves to be counted for representation. After all, these delegates argued slaves were not allowed to vote and did not hold any of the other rights of citizenship. In addition, some delegates wanted slavery to end. The delegates finally agreed to count 3/5 of the total number of enslaved people in each state. The 3/5ths Compromise was attached to the Great Compromise. By settling the issue of representation, the delegates moved closer to forming a new government. After this issue was dealt with, some delegates still spoke out against slavery. Governor Morris of Pennsylvania called slavery, quote, "the curse of heaven on the states where it existed. The curse of heaven." Other delegates were afraid that if the Constitution stopped states from importing slaves, the Southern states would not approve the Constitution. The delegates agreed that Congress could not end the slave trade before 1808. What issue was settled when delegates agreed to both the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifths Compromise? In summary, instead of just fixing the Articles of Confederation, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention decided to write a new constitution. The Great Compromise resolved conflicts over representation in the government. And the review questions.